the Indian ambassador in Bangladesh, he keeps getting summoned and by the current dispensation, and the Indian ambassador has tried to play this soft approach that we need to take the relationship forward, and as you mentioned, India will have to take a longer perspective, see the next election which is going to happen. How do they see this now, that the primacy of India as a regional leader for some time, in this area? Do they want to continue accepting that, or is there resistance towards that? How do they see it?
I think all these countries are playing a game of hedging their bets, of diversifying relations, and finding a way to live, and benefit from India, but at the same time also have alternatives.
Like defense purchases. They're buying from Europe, they want
Trade,
to now buy. China.
In Bangladesh, again, we saw Professor Yunus tell us about Bangladesh's interest to join ASEAN in some form, or as a dialogue partner. RCEP, the regional comprehensive
dialogue partner in ASEAN?
No, not yet.
They're not.
No, they want to upgrade that. They want to negotiate an entry into regional comprehensive economic partnership, or the trade arrangement that India opted out of. So there's all those signals of diversifying relations, but that's not a Bangladesh-centric story. That's what the Maldives has been, is still doing. That's what Sri Lanka is doing, etc. But it's very difficult for many of these leaders to resist the temptation to play politics. What does it mean? It means that during elections, or after elections in particular, you have to position yourself often in a way to win votes based on an anti-India agenda. That's what Muizu did, President Muizu in the Maldives, for example. And it cost him because he came to power, and you can't just then switch off the plug and say, now I'm friends with India, I've reached power. So for many months, he actually took actions that hurt Indian interests, right? Including on the position of the presence of Indian security forces in the Maldives, which then, of course, India had to push back. But within 6 months after his election, you saw a recalibration of the relation. He came here, and there was a succession of visits and a normalization of the relationship. What I'm saying is there are going to be cycles of political animosity.
Okay.
And some leaders play into this, Smita, to a point that really hurts relations in the long term. I'll give you one example. Prime Minister Oli in Nepal.
Yes.
He has systematically played since 2020
an anti-India card.
Which benefits him in some ways at home, but has destroyed any trust in India. And by the way, a Delhi that is fine a government to deal with many formerly anti-Indian or people who came from groups that were maybe hostile towards India. Think of the current presidents of Sri Lanka, right? Which comes from a political lineage that was certainly not favorable towards India over the last few decades.
But things have changed then.
I'm talking about the Taliban, for example. We had the foreign minister, the industries minister here. It took some time, but the relationship is developing. So I think the open hand is here always. And that's why I gave you the example of the home minister going and opening up the integrated checkpost passenger terminal on the India-Bangladesh border last October. That's why India, for the first time, operationalized Nepal exports of electricity to Bangladesh via India transmission lines after August 24 to support Bangladesh's energy transition. Right? They could have also switched off that plug and say, no, we know we don't have a good political relationship with Bangladesh, so we're going to slow on this. These are signals, I think, that explain what I think in the neighborhood is a dual-track policy of India.
So for Nepal and for Bangladesh, is it the first time that they've had these multiple suitors, China, the US, India?
Yes,
it's the first time.
Which is why you can't, it's very tempting to play the China card these days if you're in Nepal. And also because they do a lot. China has been delivering a lot of developmental defense solutions to these countries. It's showering them with political attention instruments. The recent studies we've done at CSEP, for example, my institute, on how China is developing deep inroads in these countries. It's because they're preparing the long-term game of building influence through sometimes very simple things, scholarships, exchanges, fellowships for politicians that are elected members of parliament. Not so much on defense equipment, you've been reporting
about only with the leadership, not with the people?
With everyone, spreading their eggs into different baskets, different political constituencies. In Sri Lanka, for example, you see now a growing outreach of the Chinese government towards the Tamil constituency, which traditionally was not engaging with China. It was mostly the South, the JVP, and a variety of other groups, and particularly the Rajapaksas, for example. What I'm saying is that what's very interesting is that there are leaders who play this to a point that it hurts the relationship. And there are leaders, I think, like the Sri Lankan president, for example, who abstained from this. And he got elected without caving in to this shrill anti-Indianism. He came to power, he worked out a relationship where he's frank and calls up Delhi and says, listen, on these things I cannot deliver. I have trade unions or I have pressure from my conservative base and I can't, right? Often it is about
It's actually the India playbook.
But it's a maturity of leadership.
What I mean to say is India does the same when it comes to dealing with Russia,
Correct.
dealing with America.
Yes.
It's the same playbook.
It's a mini lab.
Yeah.
This is exactly, you're absolutely right? These countries are doing a non-alignment on you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and therefore it shouldn't be too difficult for us to understand and navigate it. And frankly, the Indian government has been quite clear. I mean, these shrill assessments that India is losing the neighborhood. I mean, look at the waterways, the roads, the railways that India's built with Bhutan, with Bangladesh, with Nepal. I mean, till 5 years ago, India was exporting electricity to Nepal, sitting on the largest hydropower potential in the world. Look how ironic this was after decades, right, of neglecting the hydropower potential. Today, you have Bhutan and Nepal generating record levels of hydropower and exporting to India and beyond to Bangladesh in the case of Nepal. So things that we thought of for decades that were not activated because you could just sit on these neighboring countries and deal with political and security instruments have become now, I think, shaped by an economic logic. That's why, for example, the Indian Prime Minister went to Sri Lanka and spoke about a land bridge, right? An idea that is not just a bridge, but power sector, for example, transmission lines, oil and energy pipelines, data cables that connect the mainland of India to Sri Lanka. So I think that logic is also very difficult to sell sometimes in those countries, but you see the maturity of some leaders who are able to tell the people, listen, we may have political problems with India, and there are many, identity angst or whatever, but we need to find a solution because we will not grow. We will not become middle-income countries unless, first and foremost, we engage with India. Of course, you have to engage with many, with China on trade, with the Southeast Asians. But, I mean, you cannot be under the illusion, and many have caved in, that somehow the gold lies beyond, right? And I think that's been the problem with the current dispensation in Bangladesh, which has not been able to articulate this. And this is felt. You feel, if you're sitting here and you're not, and the neighboring country is not telling you, yes, I hear you, and we're going to find a way. That's immaturity from a political leadership. And we have political leaders that are in that category, and we have others that have played this well. Frankly, the Nepal crisis. I mean, why has India reacted differently towards Nepal? Same, complete coup, complete change. Students in the streets, burning down things. Two transitional figures emerging. Why is India supportive and why has India been so supportive of Nepal? Because she's come in, the provisional prime minister, and said we're going to have elections.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can do.
So we wait and watch for elections to happen in Bangladesh and in Nepal. Better to take a hands-off approach?
Yeah, I think it's two things. Hands-off, I mean, what does hands-off mean? You're
and this is not get involved
engineering.
in the politics.
No,
Yeah,
you're not
correct.
engineering. And in fact, the Chinese have burned their own hands by trying to engineer Nepal, for example.
Yeah.
I think India, that's also a good learning here, that you can't do things you used to do maybe in the past.
Yeah.
Because also, what's the utility? They're all going to be the same, more or less, the leaders. That's not the long-term point. What you can do is, I think, and I've been a big proponent of this, and I think it's something we don't see, Smita, which is India's finally connecting through infrastructure, energy, transportation, for the first time since the 1960s properly. I mean, for example, India, East Pakistan, Bangladesh 1964, just before the war, 12 railway links connecting India to East Pakistan. Adversary country, technically, 64, right? Today, we're still below 10. So we're still behind what we used to be in terms of flow of growth, capital, movement, mobility, transportation, right? And that is a long-term agenda which will be politicized. But we have to depoliticize and say, listen, there are political problems. Sometimes they connect to economic issues. But we also have to understand that we cannot afford and we will not grow on either side. Assam will not grow unless it connects with Bhutan, with Bangladesh.
Yeah,
right?
The Act East policy.
Correct. The Northeast will have to grow through more connectivity with its neighboring countries. And that, I think, India is doing more than ever, but it's, of course, not good enough. But just point about Ambassador Srivastava about the importance, Smita, of deep knowledge about these societies. We need to know these countries. If you see what Ambassador Srivastava is telling us, look at the density of connections he had in Pakistan.
Yeah.
built on expertise, on the time he had to read, to engage, to cultivate relations with people probably that were not exactly sometimes biggest friends of India, if you think of it in the newspapers, but you engage them and you build rapports. And for that, we need knowledge about these countries, which means I think by now in India, we should have at least a dozen Bangladesh centers at universities and at think tanks. And I don't see this.
Yeah.
For the last year and a half, we had political problems with Bangladesh. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't invite Bangladeshi academics, scholars on economics, on the jute industry in Bangladesh, on the political economy, on health, on digital, on technology in Bangladesh, to come here and tell us about the country. And I don't see that enough.
Yes. In fact, all these conclaves that take place, you don't see Bangladeshi participation. I mean, forget now, even during Sheikh Hasina's time, you didn't see much of participation happening. You're so right. Absolutely.
Not enough. Very little from
even
the neighborhood.
Even from Sri Lanka, not much.
It reminds me of what supposedly Vice President Sarah Palin said. I mean, I think she was taken out of context, but it became a joke, which is, she said, I'm from Alaska, I understand Russia because I can see it.
Yeah, we can see that, yes.
I think often we have this illusion that we're sitting in the region and we know our neighbors very well. We don't. I mean, this is the 8th largest country. I keep saying this. This requires a lot of experts and knowledge. And I think this is also felt in those neighboring countries. That are you studying? Are you engaging? Are you bringing us in? How many universities are sending their PhD students to Nepal, to Bhutan, to Sri Lanka, to Bangladesh and India, right? From India. Not many. Field work, which means building these rapports, connecting, learning the language, understanding their perspective on things. And I'm worried about that. I think we need to invest much more in our neighborhood knowledge, right? From a policy perspective, of course, from a national interest perspective in India, but we need to invest. And we can't wish these countries away or just deal with them when things blow up suddenly.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching ANI podcast with Smita Prakash.
अगर हम उसको मस्जिद कहेंगे तो फिर विवाद होगा।
The issue is टूटा है क्या भारत?
400 पार का मतलब ये है कि संविधान खतरे में है।
क्या हम लोग ये निर्देश देते हैं कि फला को गिरफ्तार करके जेल डाल?
वही तो कह रहे हैं सब।
ये बेबुनियाद निराधार आरोप।
सच्चा सुनना चाहो देखो स्मिता प्रकाश ANI, it does not lie.